In his book, The Message of the Psalms, Walter Brueggemann writes, generation after generation, faithful women and men turn to the Psalms as a helpful resource for conversation with God about things that matter most. The Psalms are helpful because they are a genuinely dialogical literature that express both sides of the conversation of faith. Psalms articulate the entire gamut of Israel's speech to God, from profound praise to the utterance of unspeakable anger and doubt. And in this literature, the community of faith also continues to hear the voice of God, who speaks to the community of faith in its need and in its celebration. I love this quote because once I read it, I was like, that's what's been happening every time I read the Psalms. It almost feels as if you're listening into a conversation. So many of the Psalms open up with a plea to God and going up to God, and then all of a sudden there's a turning point in many Psalms in which all of a sudden God speaks in first person back down to the writer of the Psalm itself. And you'll see that today. Brueggemann goes on to organize the Psalms into three different categories. The first category is Psalms of orientation, Psalms of disorientation, and then Psalms of new orientation. Psalms of orientation are those Psalms that are basically just communicating a sense of well-being, and it's within these Psalms of orientation that we often see the Psalms that celebrate creation. Psalms of disorientation are those Psalms that communicate the community lament, community crisis, community struggle, or personal crisis, lament, or struggle. And then the new orientation, Psalms of new orientation are those Psalms which, in having been delivered from crisis, having been delivered from struggle, the Psalms of new orientation communicate thanksgiving and confidence and well-being in the presence of God. So with this in mind, we're now going to read Psalm 95. Come, let us for joy. Let's start again. Take two. Come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout aloud to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before him with thanksgiving and extol him with music and song. For the Lord is the great God, the great King above all gods. In his hands are the depths of the earth, and the mountain peaks belong to him. The sea is his, for he made it, and his hands formed the dry land. Come, let us bow down in worship. Let us kneel before the Lord, our Maker. For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, the flock under his care. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as you did at Meribah, as you did that day in Massah in the desert, where your fathers tested and tried me, though they had seen what I did. For 40 years I was angry with that generation. I said, they are a people whose hearts go astray, and they have not known my ways. So I declared an oath in my anger, they shall never enter my rest. This is God's words to us this morning. As we approach our nation's Thanksgiving holiday, Psalm 95 reminds us of the 5 following things. Number 1, God is the creator. God is the creator. Verses 4 and 5, again, in his hand are the depths of the earth, and the mountain peaks belong to him. The sea is his, for he made it, and his hands formed the dry land. Until scientists disprove it, something cannot come from nothing. Therefore, from the very origins of our Judeo-Christian faith, believers have held that God is the creator of all. The very existence of creation itself requires an outside force. God is the creator of all. 6 words, but I believe in those 6 words, there's a lot packed into it. God is the creator of all. Inherent in that statement is the assertion that God pre-exists all that does exist. Before anything was, God is. In other words, God is pre-existent. And so the Bible teaches in Revelation, God is the Alpha, God is the beginning. And Revelation teaches, God is the Omega, God is the end. And so we think of time in a linear sense from beginning to end, but God transcends that. God pre-exists our understanding of time. God extends beyond where time may end. God transcends time. God is the creator of all. Inherent in the statement is the assertion that God is all-powerful. Can we even imagine the type of power it takes to create something from nothing? I don't know if we can. I mean, the power that it would take to create all that we know that is in outer space, and all that we know that's in inner space, and all that we know in between. If you can think of its existence, God created it. Can we even imagine that power? And although we never want to admit it, if God can manage that type of power, or if God is that power, a power of such magnitude that we honestly can barely imagine it, if God can manage that type of power, then God is probably much, 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 much smarter than you and I. God is the creator. God is pre-existent. God is eternal. God is all-powerful. God is all-knowing. Aren't these the very definitions of God? And so to touch on the theme of Thanksgiving, I wanted to refer to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 18, which reads, "Give thanks in all circumstances. Give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus." Now, I gotta be honest with you. This is a verse that I've struggled with for most of my life, and I only feel in recent years that I'm beginning to understand this. Because to give thanks to God in all circumstances, it's really easy. We all know that in times when things are good, when there's money in the bank, when you're well employed, when you're getting along at work and you're getting along with your family, your relationships are good, when things are good, it's easy to give thanks to God. But emotionally, when things go south, when the money isn't in the bank, or you've lost your job, or you're struggling in that environment, or you're struggling at home, or the most significant relationships you're in are on the skids, when your health is going, when you're chronically in pain, emotionally in those moments, really, God? You call us to give thanks? What does that mean? And I'm beginning to understand that when we understand who God is the creator, all-knowing, pre-existent, eternal, all-powerful, all-knowing, sovereign. God transcends our circumstances. Our circumstances are only temporal, but God transcends them. God is bigger than our circumstances. And so there is a moment, you see, if we focus on our circumstances, what we are doing is taking our eyes off of God. And even in our worst circumstances, if we take our eyes off our circumstances and on to God, we recognize who God is. And I think when we do that, we're humbled and we're moved to a point of thanksgiving. But perhaps I've gotten a little ahead of myself. Psalm 95 not only celebrates God as the creator, but God is our creator. Verse 6, "Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker." Friends, the good news is that it's personal. God did not just get all the widgets together and all the mechanics together and all the the screws together and piece this whole thing together and then wind it up and then walk away. And especially in the creation with regards to our humanity, God created us as a part of creation, but set us apart from creation. We were made in the image of God, and we were made with the intention of being in relationship with God, which sets us apart from all of creation. It's personal. It's not just the Lord, the Creator, but it's the Lord, our Maker, our Creator. Our, in the phrase our Maker, implies ownership. Now, when I thought of this, I thought of the pride. This is what I see in my mind's eye, so I'm just going to share it with you. You know, we do the car show every year, and there are guys with some really cool cars. Classic cars, you know, a lot of chrome. It's just muscle engines. It's like, oh, yeah. And you talk to those owners, they're like, yeah, this is my car. And you can just sense that kind of pride. Now, I was going to go in this direction, and then I realized, well, it's not like we own God. But it kind of touches on that feeling of this is our God. A sense of ownership, but we don't own, it falls short because we don't own God. And so then I thought, it's really not a sense of ownership, it's a pride of ownership. It's really a pride of relationship. And then I thought about kids. So, you know, and it's kind of an anomaly, right? You've got teenagers, and you walk into a room with your teenagers, and teenagers don't want to be seen with you and try to avoid you at any cost, right? But little kids, don't you love it? Dad walks into the nursery, and the moment they see Dad, it's like, Daddy! And Mom comes home from work, Mommy! It's a pride and a love of relationship. It's not just God, the Creator. It's God, our Creator. And in that, is a sense that we have accessibility. If God seeks to be in relationship with us, then somewhere in that DNA is an idea that if we're meant to be in relationship with God, then we are meant to be accessible to God. To make this point, I've got some pictures for you. So let's bring up the first picture. Okay, famous picture. Where was this picture taken? Okay, well, you know what I heard? I heard Oval Office. Okay, we all know that that is the Oval Office, right? And, okay, has any of us ever been, anybody in this room ever been in the Oval Office? And really? But did you actually go in the Oval Office? Gina's going, no, she didn't. She's like, actually, and now you're questioning yourself. So last night we had some smart Alex, because number one, there was a guy in the back who said, yeah, I've been in the Oval Office. And I'm like, yeah, really? And he's like, well, the one up at Reagan Library. No, that does not count. Then there was another smart Aleck right here in the front row, which was where all of the confirmation students were, right in this row. And there's oh yeah, I've been there. Now I can't, it was out of the corner of my eye, so I looked down thinking, who's been to the Oval Office, especially from the front row of our confirmation? It's my son. All right, now post 9/11 especially, does anybody really want to take the risk of jumping the fence and running towards the White House trying to get in it? Yeah, no, right? We don't have that kind of clearance. Next picture. Guess who does? Guess who's got the clearance? Can you imagine being able to just run into the Oval Office, into the presence of the president of the, especially at this time, of the strongest country in the world, and just being able to run into the presence? I've actually been, yesterday, as I was doing things around the house, I was watching the History Channel, and they've been doing a series on Lincoln. And there was just this one segment, and I go, oh, that totally applies to the message this weekend. They were talking about how Lincoln and Mary Todd just loved their children to the point where some thought they were just a little too loose in their parenting, because those kids would like overrun the White House. And President Lincoln would have like cabinet meetings at the White House, and there are letters of cabinet members who would complain about the president's children because they would just burst in to cabinet meetings and totally be disruptive. And President Lincoln just thought it was great. And then the kids would run out and they'd go on with business. So accessibility. Why does he have accessibility? That's John Jr., right? Why does he have accessibility to the president? Because he's his son. Next picture. This is just a series of photos. Yeah, next. She's so cute, a little baby. Okay. And I could not get you the last picture of this series, but the last picture was he's actually picking up his son on the seat and hugging him and bringing him in for a hug. The son has access to the Father. And I think these pictures really represent to us. In the Old Testament, reading this psalm, for example, it implies the sense of God is our maker, and there is a sense of pride in that relationship and accessibility, but that accessibility is made complete through Jesus. That truth that's implied in the Old Testament is made complete in Jesus, God's one and only Son, who has accessibility to the Father. So imagine yourself, you're a little toddler, and you're little John's friend. And you come over to the White House to play, and you don't know about politics and blah, 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 and you're just running around with your friend, and then all of a sudden you burst through a door, and all of a sudden you're in the Oval Office, and the next thing you know, you're crawling around under a desk with your best friend in the presence of the president. That's awesome. And I think the truth of the good news of Jesus Christ is that it's not just that we can be friends with Jesus and have accessibility to the Father, but the Bible goes on to teach that we are the adopted children into the presence of God. That not only are we welcomed as Jesus' friends, but we are adopted sons and daughters into the presence of our Father in heaven. Number 3, God is our caregiver. God is the creator, God is our creator, and God is our caregiver. For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, the flock under his care. Verse 7. The more I read verses like this, and the more I reflect on where we are so far removed from first century agricultural life and shepherding. So I was trying to think, well, how do we relate that idea to how we live our lives today? Now, California, I don't think we have sheep so much as we have cattle. We're kind of more of a ranching clan than a shepherding clan. But let's face it, look around. I don't think we have any ranchers in the room today. We live in suburbia, people. It's true. So what have we got? What have we got that can relate to this idea of shepherding? And so I started to just think of all the areas perhaps in our lives where we are caring for and managing people. Now, that could be, for some of us, our places of work. You may be a manager in your place of work, and you work with a team, and you know everybody in that team, and you know their strengths, you know their weaknesses, and you give certain assignments to certain people because you know their gifts and their strengths, and other people, you manage them. That's shepherding. We do that with our families. I mean, I'll tell you, there are conversations. I just know the details of my children. I know that there are conversations I can have with my son at a certain time, but if I have it at another time, he'll just break down. And then with my daughter, I've got to have conversations with her sometimes, and if the time schedule is totally different, I talk with her at a totally different time, which basically comes down to, you don't have a conversation with my son before he goes to bed because he's tired and grumpy. But the best time to have a conversation with my daughter is right before she goes to bed. We just know the details, right, of each little thing, and we manage it. That's parenting. That's work. Maybe you're a pet person, right? You have pets, and you just know that if I feed my dog this, man, it's going to be a mess. So I don't. Right? Some of us are teachers, and we know the strengths and weaknesses of the children that we work in, and so on. All of that, all of those concepts are the ideas of shepherding, of caring for and managing. God is our caregiver, and he's got the big picture in mind, and he knows all the details and how to manage that through. The depths of God's caregiving for humanity was a willingness to protect us to the full extent of surrendering and sacrificing his one and only Son, so that the sting of sin and death would not affect us. We raise our kids, we manage our teams and stuff because we want the best. We don't want to see the worst. And God, seeing the worst, provided a means to care for us through his Son, Jesus. There's, I did not know this, but reported in December of 2010, there is a museum of the Confederacy. And it doesn't tell me where it is, but I'm going to assume it's in the South. And at this Museum of the Confederacy, there's a woman named Catherine Wright, and she's the museum's collections manager. And she had been working at the museum for quite some time. And on one of the shelves, there was a glass vial with a piece of paper in it that was sealed with a cork. And just working there day after day after day, she kept seeing this thing and didn't really know what it was. It wasn't labeled. And so with the help of a cryptologist, a Navy cryptologist, and a CIA code breaker, they decided they were going to open this thing up and read what was on it. And basically, it was an encrypted, coded message. And they did figure it out. And on that piece of paper, it was dated July 4th, 1863. And the message was sent from a Confederate commander to Lieutenant General John Pemberton. Now, General Pemberton was in charge of Vicksburg in Mississippi. And Vicksburg had been surrounded by the Northern troops and under siege for quite some time. And the message was a plea for assistance. And so Mrs. Wright summarized what the message read. Now, this is from the Confederate commander back to General Pemberton. And the words on this encrypted message read, "I can't help you. I have no troops. I have no supplies. I have no way to get there." End of message. And it's on that same day that Pemberton surrendered to Grant's army. And this was believed to be the turning point of the fall of the South. Can you imagine how hopeless they must have felt, being Pemberton's troops, to find out after all of the work that they had done to hold the city, to find that there were no more resources. There was no more help. The fact is, we are all, each and every one of us, souls under siege. We need help, we need relief, and we need care. But instead of saying, "I can't help you," God said, "Nothing can separate you from my love." Romans chapter 8, verse 39. And instead of saying, "I have no troops," God said, "I have my Son." Hebrews 1:5. Instead of saying, "I cannot get there," God sent his Son into the world so that those who put their trust in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. John 3:16. God is the Creator. God is our Creator. God is our perfect caregiver. Now, on to point 4. Have you ever been in the place in your life when you were wrestling with your strength? Whoa, let's say that again. When you were wrestling for strength in your faith. You're wrestling with your faith, and so you turn to the Bible for answers. And you're reading these stories. And you think to yourself, I'm struggling now, but man, if I had been alive then, if I had only been alive then, man, if I could have been there when God was creating everything and actually seen what was going on, wow, wouldn't my faith be so much stronger today? Or what if I had been there when the walls of Jericho had fallen? If I had actually seen it with my own eyes, how much stronger would my faith be today? Or if I had been there at the birth of Jesus to actually see those herald angels singing, how much stronger would my faith be today, having seen it with my own eyes? Or the miracles of Jesus, any one of them, just give me one. The feeding of the 5,000, if I had actually been there, if I had actually eaten that bread, eaten that fish, how much stronger would my faith be today? to see it with your own eyes, to hear it with your own ears. Wow, to experience it personally. Wouldn't that be awesome? Wouldn't your faith be bolstered? Don't be so sure. Don't be fooled, because the answer is maybe not. Psalm 95, verses 7 through 9. Today, and I want to point out before I read it, this is the turning point in this psalm. Remember I introduced today's message with this idea of being a dialogical conversation, a dialogue between God and the psalm writer. And it goes up, and then sometimes God comes back down in the Psalms. And this is a moment in this psalm that this happens. God is referred to in the first 60% of the psalm in the third person. And then, all of a sudden, it becomes the first person, and God is speaking back in the first person. So now that I've said it, you'll see it. Psalm 95, verses 7 through 9. Today, if you hear his voice, third person, do not harden your hearts as you did at Meribah, as you did that day at Massah in the desert, where your fathers tested and tried me. Though they had seen what I did. Let me read that again. Where your fathers tested and tried me, though they had seen what I did. They had seen it. They had experienced it. They had lived it. They were slaves in Egypt, and they had seen the 10 plagues. Plagues of water turned to blood. The plague of frogs. The plague of gnats. The plague of flies. The devastation of livestock. They had seen the 10 plagues. They had seen the boils and the plague of thunder and hail, the plague of locusts, the plague of darkness that lasted 3 days. They had been there. And they had seen and experienced the plague of the death of the firstborn and experienced the Passover. But wait, that's not all. They experienced having been delivered out of slavery. They experienced the presence of God in their midst through a pillar of a cloud and of fire. They had experienced the parting of the sea and seen the Egyptian army being destroyed behind them. When they were hungry, God delivered both meat and manna through quails and manna from heaven. And when they were thirsty in the desert, they had seen and experienced and tasted when Moses hit the rock with his staff and water came out. They had been there. At every stage of the journey out of Egypt, all the way to Mount Sinai, God demonstrated his covenant love and his protection over Israel. And yet, in Exodus chapter 15, at Meribah, which that word in Hebrew means quarreling, at Meribah and Massah, which in Hebrew means testing, they began to question the leaders that God had placed in their lives, Aaron and Moses, and they began to test God himself. The people accused Moses of leading them into disaster and trying to kill them. After all, I mean, they had been in Egypt where they were slaves, but boy, did they eat well. In Egypt, a regular staple diet of bread and barley beer, vegetables like leeks, lettuce, cucumbers, garlic, lentils, beans, chickpeas, onions. Who's getting hungry for Thanksgiving? Fruit like dates, figs, melons, grapes, olives, and pomegranates. Fish, and more rarely, meat, wild game, and chicken. They ate well. Why was the community of Israel complaining? But more importantly, what did their complaint actually reveal? They had seen it all. God had delivered them. They had experienced it. Their complaint to Moses was that it would have been better to die fat in slavery than to die in the desert free. The response, get this, the response of the Israelites to their suffering shows a lack of gratitude for their redemption from slavery. And just as importantly, it shows their lack of faith in God. God had done all of that. Would he not also provide for them And yet they questioned it all. And so having been there, having seen it, having done it, does not necessarily guarantee that our faith would be stronger. Jesus taught in John chapter 20, verse 29, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe." And so Psalm 95 reminds us to remember. Remember the works of God throughout salvation history. Remember the works of God within our own community of faith. Remember the acts of God within your own family and within your own life. Let us, point 4, let us not forget. It's in remembering that our hearts, it's in remembering that our souls are inspired to give thanks. And lastly, verse number 5. Let us give God our thanks. Verse 2, let us come before him with thanksgiving and extol him with music and song. In preparation for this message today, I was reading an online article, and the writer was reflecting on how so many of the Jewish holidays and festivals were directly linked to acts of charity, of caring for the poor and the widowed and the orphans. And it was one line that stood out to me in this article, and it was, and the line was, "Thanksgiving fosters charity." Thanksgiving fosters charity. Now think of the opposite of that. If you don't have a spirit of thankfulness, whether it's thanking other people or thanking God, if you really believe that all of the accomplishments of your life have been accomplished based on what you've done, you've earned it. Everything. It's yours. You earned it. Of course, with that inward focus and with that selfish perspective, why would you want to give anything away? It's with a spirit of thanksgiving that fosters, it's that thanksgiving that fosters a sense of charity, that all we have has been given to us. And as it overflows from our life, we allow that to overflow into the lives of others. And so we did something differently in our worship service today. We only have a couple songs in the front, but we really packed this worship service with more songs at the end, more than normal, with an opportunity of having heard God's word to respond in charity and then to literally come before him with thanksgiving and extol him in music and song. Let's pray.